The Zurkon came from the void, their ships glimmering like steel monoliths, blocking out the sun and casting Earth into eternal dusk. When they arrived 50 years ago, humanity marveled, hopeful for contact with beings from the stars. But that hope was short-lived. The Zurkon didn't come in peace. They came with a singular purpose: to extract Earth's resources and enslave its people. The invasion wasn't swift, it was surgical. The Zurkon dismantled Earth's governments, crippled its militaries, and shattered its defenses in a matter of weeks. Their weapons, far more advanced than anything humanity could comprehend, turned cities into rubble. Survivors were herded like cattle into labor camps, where they became miners for the alien overlords. Earth itself was stripped bare, its forests burned, its oceans poisoned, its minerals stolen. To the Zurkon, humanity was nothing more than a means to an end. They were fragile creatures, too weak to resist, too abundant to ignore. Each human was assigned a life sentence in the mines, digging deep into the Earth's crust to extract rare elements the Zurkon needed to power their empire. There was no hope for escape. No one who entered the mines ever came out alive. Among these slaves was a boy named Aric. Born in the suffocating darkness of the mines, Aric had never seen the sun. His world was one of choking dust, the echo of pickaxes against rock, and the ever-present crackle of Zurkon energy whips. His earliest memories were of hunger gnawing at his belly and the hollow faces of the other slaves around him. His mother, a woman whose spirit was as unyielding as the rocks they mined, had done her best to protect him. She told him stories of the world before the Zurkon, stories of green fields, blue skies, and freedom. "Never forget," she would whisper to him as they huddled together in the darkness. "There was a time when we were free, and there will be a time when we are free again." But the Zurkon had no tolerance for hope. One day, when Aric was no older than 6, his mother was caught speaking forbidden words. The alien overseers dragged her away, and he never saw her again. Alone and helpless, Aric learned the lesson the Zurkon wanted to teach. Hope was a dangerous thing. Years passed, and Aric grew into a teenager. The mines had hardened him, chiseling away the softness of youth and replacing it with lean muscle and sharp instincts. His hands were calloused, his skin scarred, but his eyes still burned with a defiance that no whip could extinguish. Unlike many of the other slaves, who trudged through their days with hollow resignation, Aric refused to bow his head. He worked because to stop meant death, but he didn't let the Zurkon break him. Deep inside, he clung to the stories his mother had told him. He had no illusions of freedom. He had never even seen the world beyond the mines, but he still dreamed of escape. His defiance didn't go unnoticed. The Zurkon overseers often singled him out for punishment, their energy whips lashing his back as they barked orders in their guttural language. But no matter how many times they struck him, he refused to cry out. Pain became a companion, one he welcomed because it reminded him he was still alive. It wasn't just the overseers who noticed Aric's spirit. The other slaves, worn down by years of labor, began to see him as something more. He became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that not everyone had given up. Quietly, he began to gather a following. It started with whispers in the shadows, stolen conversations during breaks. He spoke of the Zurkon's weaknesses, of the ways they could fight back. He told them that death was better than a life in chains. At first, many were reluctant. "What's the point?" they would say. "We'll just get ourselves killed." But Aric's words had a way of burrowing into their minds. "We're already dead," he would reply. "Every day we live like this, we're already dead. At least if we fight, we die as humans, not as slaves." Slowly, the spark of rebellion began to grow. Aric's rebellion wasn't born out of pure altruism. Deep down, he knew he wasn't fighting for humanity's freedom. He was fighting for his own. His hatred for the Zurkon was real, but so was his desire to escape. As much as he wanted to inspire others, he knew the truth. Humanity couldn't win. The Zurkon were too powerful, their technology too advanced. The rebellion was doomed to fail. But Aric had a plan. He had spent years watching the Zurkon, studying their movements, their technology, their language. He had learned that the Zurkon had a policy for dealing with traitors. Humans who betrayed their own kind were spared the mines and given a place among the Zurkon's servants. It was a life of servitude, but it was still a life, better than dying in the mines. Aric began to shape the rebellion not as a path to victory, but as a path to his own escape. He approached the Zurkon in secret, offering them a deal. He would feed them information about the rebellion in exchange for passage off Earth. The alien overseers were skeptical at first, but Aric's intelligence and knowledge of the mines convinced them. They agreed to his terms, but only if he proved his loyalty by ensuring the rebellion's failure. Aric returned to his followers with renewed vigor, hiding his betrayal behind a mask of determination. He spoke of the rebellion as if it were a sure thing, promising that their uprising would shake the Zurkon to their core. The slaves rallied behind him, their spirits ignited by his fiery speeches. They didn't see the cracks in his facade. The day of the rebellion dawned with an unnatural silence. The air inside the mines, thick with metallic dust, seemed to hum with tension. Shadows moved furtively in the dim, flickering light of the Zurkon's bioluminescent lamps. For weeks, Aric and his followers had prepared for this moment, gathering scraps of metal, sharpening mining tools, and hoarding pieces of alien machinery that could be fashioned into rudimentary weapons. They had memorized the guards' routines, their patrol shifts, and their vulnerabilities. Every detail had been meticulously planned, or so the rebels believed. Aric stood in the center of the dim cavern where the rebellion had been plotted, his voice rising above the whispers of the gathered slaves. His words carried the fervor of a man who believed, or pretended to believe, that victory was within reach. "We strike now," he said, his voice echoing off the jagged stone walls. "No more waiting, no more bowing our heads. Today, we remind the Zurkon that we are not insects to be crushed underfoot. Today, we rise as humans." The crowd roared in agreement, fists raised, faces alight with determination. Some of them were little more than walking skeletons, their skin stretched thin over bone, their bodies broken by years of labor. Yet, in this moment they stood tall, driven by a desperate hope. For many, it wasn't about winning, it was about choosing the manner of their death. But Aric wasn't thinking about death. Not his own, at least. The rebellion began in an instant. A slave feigned a stumble, spilling a cart of or near a group of Zurkon guards. As the aliens turned to investigate, sharp, rusted picks came down on their chitinous heads. The guards fell, their energy weapons clattering to the ground. The rebels seized the weapons and charged, a cacophony of shouts and screams reverberating through the mines. The first wave of Zurkon guards was caught off guard. Rebels flooded the tunnels, overwhelming the aliens with sheer numbers. Though poorly armed, the humans fought with a ferocity born of years of suffering. The Zurkon, despite their advanced technology, struggled to contain the chaos. Their energy weapons, designed for precision, were ill-suited to the cramped tunnels, where every shot risked ricocheting off the walls. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed as though the rebels might succeed. The mines, so long a place of despair, had become a battlefield. Humans surged forward, their cries of defiance drowning out the mechanical whine of alien plasma rifles. Aric fought alongside them, swinging a scavenged blade with calculated intensity. He shouted orders, directing the chaos, his voice cutting through the din. His followers looked to him, their leader, their hope. They didn't know that his mind was elsewhere, that he was already thinking of the next step, the next betrayal. The Zurkon reinforcements came faster than anyone had anticipated. Aric had made sure of that. From hidden passages within the mines, the alien soldiers emerged, their towering forms silhouetted against the green glow of their weapons. These weren't the overseers the slaves were used to. These were warriors, clad in armor that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. They moved with ruthless precision, their weapons spitting bursts of plasma that tore through flesh and stone alike. The rebels fought back, but the tide had turned. The energy weapons they had scavenged were no match for the Zurkon's superior firepower. Plasma bolts cut through the air, leaving smoking craters where human bodies had once stood. the tunnels filled with the acrid stench of burning flesh and the desperate cries of the wounded. Aric watched the slaughter unfold, his expression unreadable. He knew this moment would come. He had planned for it. Every death, every scream, was part of the bargain he had made. His heart twisted with guilt briefly. Then he reminded himself of the alternative. The mines, the chains, the endless labor. This was the price of his freedom. In the chaos, Aric slipped away. He moved through the shadows, avoiding both the rebels and the Zuran. He knew the layout of the mines better than anyone. He had spent his life in their suffocating depths. His destination was the docking bay, where the Zuran ships waited. When he arrived, an overseer was waiting for him. The alien regarded him with a mixture of disdain and satisfaction. "You have done well," the creature said in its hissing, guttural language. "The rebellion is crushed." Aric said nothing, his jaw tight. He didn't trust himself to speak. The overseer gestured for him to follow, leading him to a sleek shuttle. As the ship's ramp lowered, Aric took one last look at the mines. The screams of his followers still echoed in the distance. He turned away. The Zuran Mothership was a thing of cold, alien beauty. As the shuttle ascended into its docking bay, Aric stared out the window, his breath catching in his throat. For the first time in his life, he saw Earth from above. It was a scarred, desolate planet, its surface marred by the Zuran's relentless mining. Once green continents were now barren wastelands, and the oceans glimmered with the toxic sheen of industrial runoff. It was no longer a world worth fighting for. The interior of the mothership was no less imposing. The corridors were vast and sterile, lit by an eerie, pulsating light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air was cold, sterile, and heavy with the faint hum of alien machinery. Aric felt small here, insignificant. Yet, he also felt a flicker of something else, possibility. If he played his cards right, this could be his new life. The overseer led him through the labyrinthine corridors, past towering machines and alien workers who paid him no mind. He was brought to a chamber where a high-ranking Zuran awaited him. This creature was larger than the others, its exoskeleton adorned with intricate, glowing patterns. Its compound eyes fixed on Aric with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You have earned your place here," it said, its voice resonating like the grinding of stone. "But do not mistake servitude for freedom. You are useful for now. That is all." Aric nodded, swallowing his resentment. He had no intention of remaining a servant. He had already begun to piece together his next move. For days, Aric kept to himself aboard the Zuran mothership, blending into the shadows of its endless labyrinth of gleaming corridors and alien machinery. His silence wasn't submission, it was survival. He walked the line between obedience and invisibility, careful not to draw attention. Every moment he spent in this alien fortress was a risk, but he was patient. Patience, he knew, was the key to survival, and survival was the key to escape. The mothership was immense, a world unto itself. Its walls pulsed faintly, like the veins of some colossal beast. The Zuran moved with the unhurried efficiency of conquerors, confident in their dominance. Aric studied them relentlessly, their movements, their routines, the way they interacted with their technology. He paid particular attention to the shuttle bay, a sprawling hangar where dozens of sleek, silver vessels rested like dormant predators. To the Zuran, Aric was nothing more than a human betrayer, a tool to be used and discarded. He let them think so. They believed him broken, his spirit crushed, his humanity stripped away. That was their mistake. The rebellion on Earth raged on below. From the windows of the mothership, Aric could see plumes of fire and smoke rising from the surface. The resistance he had helped spark was in its death throes, just as the Zuran had intended. The aliens were focused on their victory, their attention turned outward. It was the perfect distraction. On the third night, when the mothership's artificial lighting dimmed to mimic the cycles of day and night, Aric made his move. He had memorized every step of his plan, every twist and turn of the corridors, every blind spot in the Zuran patrols. He moved swiftly but silently, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step brought him closer to the shuttle bay and closer to freedom. When he reached the bay, he found it almost deserted. The Zurkon, overconfident in their victory, had left only a single guard to watch over the shuttles. The creature stood near one of the vessels, its multi-limbed body illuminated by the faint green glow of the docking lights. Aric crouched in the shadows, his hand tightening around the makeshift blade he had fashioned from a piece of alien machinery. He struck without hesitation. The guard's compound eyes widened in surprise as Aric drove the blade into the soft joint between its exoskeleton plates. The alien let out a guttural hiss, its body convulsing before collapsing to the ground. Aric didn't wait to watch it die. He dragged the body into the shadows, wiped the blood from his blade, and climbed into the shuttle. The interior of the vessel was sleek and alien, its controls a bewildering array of glowing symbols and pulsing lights. But Aric had spent years studying the Zurkon's technology, observing it from the mines and during his time on the Mothership. He didn't understand the symbols, but he understood their function. His hands moved with practiced precision, flipping switches and pressing buttons. The shuttle roared to life, its engines vibrating beneath him. Alarms blared almost immediately, the docking bay filled with the sound of Zurkon voices, shouting in their guttural language. Aric's heart raced as he gripped the controls. He had anticipated this. He knew the Zurkon wouldn't let him go without a fight. The shuttle lifted off the deck, its thrusters igniting in a burst of light. Aric pushed the controls forward, and the vessel shot out of the bay into the cold expanse of space. The Zurkon ships were on him within moments. Their vessels, sleek and deadly, swarmed like hornets, plasma bolts streaking through the void. Aric flew like a man possessed. The shuttle wasn't built for combat, but it was fast, and he used its speed to his advantage. He twisted and turned, weaving through the debris field of Earth's shattered satellites. The Zurkon ships pursued him relentlessly, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness. Sweat dripped down Aric's face as he gripped the controls, his body pressed against the seat by the crushing force of the shuttle's acceleration. Every move he made was instinctual, born of desperation and sheer will. He pushed the shuttle to its limits, ignoring the warning lights that flashed across the console. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Zurkon ships began to fall back. Their plasma fire ceased, and the darkness of space swallowed their glowing forms. Aric slumped back in his seat, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had escaped. The shuttle drifted through the void, its engines silent. Aric sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. They stretched out before him, cold and unfeeling, an infinite expanse of light and shadow. For the first time in his life, he was free. But the victory felt hollow. The adrenaline that had carried him this far began to fade, replaced by a suffocating weight in his chest. His hands trembled as he leaned back, closing his eyes. He should have felt triumph, relief, even joy. Instead, he felt nothing but an aching emptiness. The faces of the rebels filled his mind. The people who had trusted him, who had followed him, who had fought and died for a cause they believed in. He had used them, betrayed them, led them to their deaths so that he could escape. He had told himself it was necessary, that he had no choice, but the weight of their deaths pressed down on him like a chain he could never break. He opened his eyes and looked out at the stars again. They were beautiful, but they offered no comfort. He was alone now, truly alone. The rebellion had given him purpose, even if it had been built on lies. Without it, without them, he was adrift. Freedom wasn't what he had imagined. It wasn't triumph or joy. It was guilt, isolation, and the haunting echoes of those he had left behind. He had escaped the mines, escaped Earth, escaped the Zurkon. But as he floated through the cold, silent expanse of space, he wondered if he had truly escaped at all. Aric sat there, staring into the void, the shuttle's controls dimly glowing around him. For years, he had dreamed of this moment, of breaking free from the chains that had bound him. Now, with the chains gone, he realized they had left scars too deep to heal. The price of freedom, he thought, was far higher than he had ever imagined, and he had paid it in full.